Hey guys, Matthew here once again, back with another edition of build review video for the league, this time around the Mercenary League. And this one is going to be a little bit hard to do, at least for ratings and stuff, because the Mercenary League was pretty impactful as a mechanic, giving us mercenaries for all of my builds. And that kind of means that you largely, for a lot of these builds, won't be able to replicate them one-to-one. But overall balance changes weren't too hefty. We just got a few buffs and nerfs here and a few additions in some other cases. So let's just kick it off with the first one, which is Flameblast Totems. Now that one was actually a build that went really well for a starter build for myself and for many other people that copied me as well. And I honestly think it was a build that already kind of existed, but no one was giving it much love or looking around for it up till now, because I actually don't honestly remember what happened with Flameblast that made me think Flameblast Totems, but I gave it a shot and ended up being a pretty damn good starter. So it went all the way. It did plenty of endgame bosses. It did up to almost 20 million DPS off of a very humble setup. Its main problems, well, two main problems, were that it was kind of squishy, as you'd expect of like a pretty basic totem character. And second of all, the Flame Blast effect was kind of cancerous. If you don't at least have this MTX that you see on screen, then it's a very bright flashbang indeed. And if you do have the MTX, you still kind of get sick of just seeing chain explosions. I suppose there is one other minor problem, and that is that you need the Flame Blast alternate gem from Lab until it really starts to feel good. So I started the build off with regular Flame Blast, and that works. You just have to, dodge a bit more as the slower wind-ups happen. Eventually, you get the real Flame Blast that we're building into, and then you really start to machine gun off Flame Blasts all over the place, and it gets very rapid and bright. So yeah, overall, it was a great starter. It was a build that could go much higher for DPS, but it was just, yeah, a little bit squish by the end of it. So certain map mods, certain like porcupine stuff like that were a bit tedious to play around. And then I don't personally love the totem playstyle. I can just tolerate it for some funner builds here or there. So if you're still looking for Flame Blast totems, absolutely should be workable. I don't think any of the new ascends change anything. I don't think Mercenary impacted this one too much either. So Flame Blast totems, probably a decent starter once again. And we'll have to give this one a quick few ratings after seeing that POG DPS. Pretty good anymore. Health bar disappeared in a matter of half a second. Anyway, let's give this one a quick rating. Effectiveness, I'd say for how cheap it was for what it could do, overall it was pretty much a 9. The enjoyment of it, I'd give it something like an I was going to give it an 8, but I think it's more of a 7. Placing totems, having to run around and then wait for enemies, stuff like that. It's not my favorite playstyle, but the novelty of Flame Blast totems being back again after so long was pretty damn cool. And realistic gear, it really is pretty realistic, but to get a bit thicker and stuff, it does take a bit more. And then replicating it without a mercenary should be pretty damn clean as well. I'd say we give it something like an 8 because I don't want it to have too high of a rating. And then if my math is correct, which it never is, and I am failing to do any right now, we're talking a 16 and 24. It's not terrible, and I think it's worthy of something like that. The next build I had going was basically starting to tackle as many of the Trarthus gems as possible because they were the new things from Mercenaries. And I tried the Spectral Shield Throw that instead of just like chaining around and bouncing around and stuff, it fires out one proj that pulses and does a lot of little projectiles. And I was pleasantly surprised with this skill at the end of the day. It is a bit worse on clear, I think, ultimately, but the single target potential of it is quite a bit higher because you can just stack up lots of shields, and I think it synergized well with like Sniper's Mark and did some crazy shit for additional shields. So if you had more Sniper Mark effect, you could shit out more shields that would do more proj, and the bigger the hitbox on the enemy, the better your single target. Something like that. So it worked out pretty well as an actual skill itself. It was also the first time I was using the new hat that was put into the game that could double your minions in a certain way. And in this case, it was double the amount of golems, which really opened up some busted scaling for Elementalist with the way that it was changed up to have way more golems giving you damage through primordial bonds. So unfortunately, it is a very high ceiling on a very high budget type of character that you can just stack a lot of primordial bonds. I'd like to say I was one of the first people to get onto this golem tech because when I got to it, it wasn't very expensive and primordial bonds weren't very expensive. We're talking, a few of them were up from megalomaniacs for just a few divines. By, mid-league, end of league, you're talking something like 30 divines for any sort of primordial bond on a megalomaniac. And that's not going to change with the new patch. The Elementalist itself got a slight nerf to its golem buff effect, but if you stack enough primordial bonds, you'll still have a crazy Elementalist character that gets a shitload of extra damage from primordial bonds, and it's still going to be pretty nutty. Overall, this was the type of character that could have done any skill, could have done any sort of scaling. I chose Spectral Shield Throw with Impulsor for the first time in a long time, and it had really nice clear, thanks to the Impulsor, but then its single target was more of the star of the show for this type of build. It still wasn't that good, honestly, for the tools I had to work with. So Spectral Shield Throw, I think, can be a little bit better with, like, a Deadeye setup or something like that. But you can see it got pretty crazy with, like, attack speed and echo and stuff. And then the single target, if we have a quick look at some of that, did do some okay things. Like I said, it was a bit weird and it was kind of dependent on certain, back here, I think, on certain like boss hitboxes. So it's a bit of a weird skill, and you kind of want to scale curse effect and curse effect scaling for your sniper mark. So the more of that, the better it got. Overall, yeah, not too bad. Golem scaling, definitely pretty insane. And the Elementalist overall should still be a pretty damn good ascendancy. As you can see, shields, shit out, do things, and lots of projectiles. So if we now give that some sort of thing, for what it was, for the amount of stuff it had, it barely performed better than Flameblast Totems or similar to Flameblast Totems. So because of all that, I'd have to give it something like an 8 instead of the 9 that Flameblast Totems deserves. The enjoyment of it, it was pretty fun to play, it was pretty fun to put together and conceptualize, and I'll give that something like an 8. So that's still an equivalent score there. Realistic gear, it wasn't particularly realistic because you need those megalomaniacs, you need certain cool items like the hat, which you might not get for a long time, especially if it becomes kind of meta again. So most of the other gear wasn't too bad, but we still give it something like a 4. So not the biggest, not the most terrific score, something like a 20. The next build we have on the list is the Starcaller axe. Now, I was pretty keen to do something with this axe when I first saw it, but then we started the league and it was not very expensive, and as such, it started to kind of indicate that it was not a very good item. I had my doubts and I figured, yeah, it's probably going to end up being something similar to a Namahu's, where it's got kind of a cool proc, and then it's really hard to scale. And that is basically what held true. I had to go from a perspective and a point of view of maximum damage, maximum potential. And for me, with that idea in mind, I went with Berserker, lots of damage, rage, all this sort of scaling, and then Abyssal Jewel stacking with all kinds of extra flat damage to actually give it some actual damage, since it has kind of low potential on its own. Starcaller itself, what it does is, like, when you hit with a melee ability, it'll proc out a bunch of Starfall sort of business, which is kind of hard to tell with how bad the bitrate is during this type of build and video. And you can either typically do it with something like Cyclone, or I tried to reinvent a little bit there with Static Strike. So you Static Strike an enemy, run around, beams are going to proc your Starcaller, and then also Rage Vortex. So Rage Vortex meant you could actually be kind of a range build a little bit with this sort of a setup and throw out a Rage Vortex and then just let all those Starfall things, proc and do a lot of their damage. In the end, it actually did perform pretty well, like did decent enough damage and clear and all that. It's a Zerker, and going from a DPS perspective meant that, of course, I'm going to be somewhat squish on this type of thing, but it can still take some hits. It, had some good fortify and instant leech, I think, as well, which kept you alive a good portion of the time. But at the end of the day, to me, it just felt a bit like I could have made anything work here once again. Like I could have made Namahu work just as well, and it takes quite a lot to make a Starcaller sort of proc and a Namahu sort of proc do any real damage. So it probably just needs more inherent scaling of its own, and then it'd be more competitive without high-end gear from Abyssal sort of stuff. It was a fast-paced character. It was a bit hard to play when you're kind of sometimes dying to bunch of random shit, but it took on a bunch of tier 17s, took on some Ubers and stuff, and was respectable enough, but I just, like I said, felt a bit, you know, lacking in what it did for what you'd put in DPS wise, where you could have got something similar to do something just a lot more if it wasn't a Starcaller. A few occasional deaths here or there, of course, but that is what it is with some tier 17s. I don't think the Mercenary was super impactful on this one, but once again, yeah, it's just going to be a couple of auras here or there that you're going to have to fix up without a Mercenary. It actually, I think, added Precision and Wrath, so it was a little bit of extra juice, but then again, the Mercenary adds half a player, so it's probably a similar enough build without a Mercenary. All in all, I'd say it was a little bit disappointing as a Starcaller axe, but an okay enough build, and obviously a proof of concept that you could make a Starcaller or pretty much anything do damage with a certain Zerker setup. So you can use that as a bit of a template for that. The effectiveness for what it was, for how it played and all that, I'd have to give it slightly less than the other two builds, maybe like a 7. The enjoyment, the proc itself was pretty cool, but other than that, it felt kind of like a melee build that wasn't as good as a melee build can be, so maybe a 7 there as well. And realistic gear, not really. Starcaller is a pretty end game item, I think, from memory. And a very good rolled Starcaller is pretty hard to get, which you probably want for this type of a build. And then all the different Abyssal Drills, you need some pretty good ones. You need the good Abyssal gear. I'd have to give this something like a 3, like a pretty low one indeed, since it'll be hard to replicate. So overall, that gets a score of a measly 17. Next build after that was trying to use one of the new unique items that dropped off the endgame bosses, and that was the 7 Teachings chest, something like that. It was basically a chest that really tried to promote the use of a unarmed skill and then some kind of cast on crit to go with it. And the way it was intended to be used was some kind of like a hybrid setup where you are attacking and critting with an unarmed skill or setup, and then having some kind of procs on top of that from your spells. And the end result was an okay build, but I think my conclusion was that you would have just had a much bigger result building a pure cast on crit type of character or a pure unarmed attacking kind of character. I went for this hybrid sort of thing that it felt like it wanted you to do, and I had Cyclone, I had Shock Nova, I had Lightning Conduit. I tried out some other spells as well, like Arc, I think, and it was all just kind of lackluster as a combination, because I'm pretty sure if I just went pure like attack based with unarmed, I would have had much more damage, given that my Doriani's Fist, Doriani's Slam, whatever the hell, ability hit for like 2 or 3 million, and I know in the past I've managed to make those things hit for like 40 million. It kind of didn't serve as much of a purpose there, and then I've of course had much bigger cast on crit builds that hit tens of millions of DPS, whereas this one was something in the like 10 million category. So it was okay for clear. It could do some tankiness by all means because it was an Inquisitor. It had Tempest Shield and good spell and attack block, and it was a proof of concept once again for the chest that could do some hybrid stuff, but the end result was I don't think the chest was very good, and it's better to just build one or the other. So it was a bit of a weird item because it also needs some really high rolls to even be somewhat usable, and in most cases the chest with some mid to low rolls just completely unusable and terrible. And yeah, for its hybrid sort of purpose, I think it was a bit of a fail, but still an interesting item to begin with and something to work into. So nothing crazy on this one at all, I don't think. The effectiveness of it had good clear, good effective character, could take plenty of hits, could get up and personal in many of the fights, and did plenty of endgame content. But compared to what it probably should have done, maybe not super high up there, a 7. The enjoyment of it was basically, at the end of the day, a basic enough Cyclone cast on crit build. So it didn't feel like anything special, even though building it felt a little bit different and a little bit special. We have to give it something low there. And then realistic gear wasn't too hard to gear up, wasn't too crazy. So maybe something like a 5. But yeah, once again, Mercenary, I think, put in a lot of work on that one to fix your accuracy through like precision, bit of extra damage through wrath, and then of course everything else that Mercs gave it. So still not terrible, but once again, just a bit lackluster, trying to force some of the things that GGG puts in front of you when there's just no hope for it to be overpowered. So what are we talking here? 18? Not terrible. Next build was by far, by that point, the strongest build I'd played that league. By that point, it did end up getting better and better. But this was currently the standout for, the few builds that I'd played. And it was pretty obvious going into mapping that it was becoming the standout, which is Void Sphere, Poison of Rending, and using the new Bladefall of Trarthus, which is kind of an auto bomber style extra few Bladefalls shitting out from your character that I was then trying to synergize with Blade Blast so that we'd occasionally consume those Bladefalls to do some big extra damage from the Bladefall Blade Blast interaction. It wasn't really what I intended it to be in the end because Void Sphere of Rending was basically the absolute star of the show of the build. But as you can see, I'm kind of like running around and proccing these or shooting out these sort of blade falls that would prolif thanks to Pathfinder prolif, and also using Obliteration Wand was just causing pops. But the blade fall itself wasn't dealing that much damage that it was that good on that sort of a thing. It was just good when there's large scale, lots of shitty little mobs. Overall though, this build had good single target, a really fun playstyle, and somewhat thick for what it was, given, Pathfinder, Poison, didn't put too much work into thickness, but it could take some hits and it could, zoom around and run through lots of enemies thanks to being a Pathfinder. I do think this was my highest level character of the league, went to like 96.5, just because blasting like thick breaches was super fun with this sort of thing. So for the new league mechanic, for the new breaches, it might be worth looking into. And it's not, too complicated of a build to put together because most of it is just unique items. But some of them are going to be a little bit harder to do, things like the Ralakesh boots. And then, yeah, who knows with some of the other stuff that's changing in the league. Maybe getting a Vertex from Uber at Zero would be hard. Maybe, yeah, I don't know. Shouldn't all be too hard. Like, it's a fairly clean character to put together. Probably not your first build, though, because it will require things like a Ralakesh. But otherwise, yeah, I was very happy with this character, and Void Sphere of Rending was a build I was looking forward to playing again, and I very much was pleased with its outcome for the second time around, this time as a poison base and a Pathfinder. If we just have a quick look at some of the single target on this one, somewhere around here, you can see it ramps pretty nicely. Didn't quite hit dot cap, I don't think, but it was still very good poison damage, and has a little bit of ramp uptime to it. As you can see, starts to take off, and then Maven gets melted by the end. Bladefall and Blade Blast weren't as big of a factor as I wanted them to be. It was much more of the Void Sphere, which is completely fine, still a big part of the build. So with that, the effectiveness, not the biggest single target, pretty damn good clear. Gonna have to give that one a 9. Enjoyment, liked it quite a lot. That I played it to, almost 97, I think. And poison builds with a pop, usually going to be pretty damn fun. Realistic gear, it'll take a bit to get to this sort of gear level, but it's not too hard to put together with a bit of work. I have to give it some pretty good scores there, so a 26 total. Next up, we had another Trarthus gem, Spectral Throw of Trarthus. Now, when I first saw this thing, I thought it had potential to be pretty damn crazy because it's basically a Spectral Throw trap that shits out a whole bunch of Spectral Throws and then comes back in on the enemy. And that you would think theoretically has a lot of overlap, a lot of shotgun, and it did kind of end up being that way. There was an extra glove mod from the Mercenary League that like had a variable on the amount of projectile speed that some proj could have, and it was, I think, in the end, a theoretical DPS upgrade that you might no longer be able to get, though I don't think it was by any means necessary. Overall, it was a pretty damn strong build because I went with the perspective of an assassin that went Hand of Wisdom in action, stacking a lot of int for my damage scaling, my entire, damage source for the build. And on top of that, our Mercenary did give us Perkle's Toe to make that lightning damage lucky. But that's pretty much all the Merc was doing. It also gave us Grace, I think, and maybe another little bit of damage. So without the Merc, I think our damage should still be similar on this one. The end kind of problem is that it's a trap build, and I did not love playing trap builds, like having to launch traps ahead of you, run around, mobs like that. It doesn't feel super fun to me. So if it does to you, that's fine. Trap builds, for Spectral Trarthus should be out there, should be pretty good. The other issue is that you need some source of like proccing your traps well. The Saboteur Chain Reaction is what I did this time around, which means you need a Forbidden Flesh or Flame, or to play Saboteur, or you need a Sunblast Belt, which changes up the build a good bit, and then the playstyle of like making your traps go towards no duration instead of trying to have them all proc at once. So the single target on it was pretty decent. The thickness and overall like build viability was pretty strong because it was a CI build with good evasion, good recovery, that sort of thing. So it was good for all of that, but yeah, I just didn't love playing traps. But the Spectral Throw Trarthus Trap I thought was pretty damn cool, and definitely a few viable builds in there. May even have to try it again in the future just because there's several different ways of building this thing. But as a trap playstyle, it's not my favorite. So the effectiveness, clear is not the best because traps and the Spectral Throw Trap isn't insane for clear or anything. So that was probably more like a 6, even though it was, good enough. And it was actually a pretty strong tier 17 character because it can handle most modifiers and it's thick enough to be able to do its damage. But it's not, amazing. The enjoyment of it, I had an okay amount of time, like just putting the character together concept-wise and then seeing Spectral throws shit out everywhere. But at the end of the day, it is a trap character. And the gear, it's int stack gear, which isn't too hard to come by, just the high end. And of course, the ceiling on something like an int stack is going to be somewhat high, but it's realistic enough. It's not too hard to put together if you, put your mind to something like this. So we'd have to go middle of the road. Not something you want to start with, but not something that's super hard to do once you have established yourself on a league. So that one, even though it was very strong for things like, end game bossing and tier 17s, not the best score just because of my own personal preferences for traps, I think. So with that, gets a 17. Our next build here is yet another new Trarthus gem, and it was the Blast Rain Trarthus. Blast Rain of Trarthus, Trarthus Blast Rain. Either way, what it is a Blast Rain that does a big AoE, which isn't even that big, of fire damage over time. So not ignite damage, it was fire damage over time, and that means that it's kind of like a caustic arrow, I suppose. Kind of. And just a bit more delay to it and fire based. It was a weird skill gem, and I didn't think it looked very good to begin with. I thought it looked cool by all means, but effectiveness wise, I wasn't really trusting it. I was told by a few people that it's kind of fun and cool. I'm like, okay, I guess I'll give it a shot. And I think I got baited into it basically because it was not a very good skill. It definitely has a ceiling as to the kind of damage it can do, even with putting out as much of the gem levels and scaling as you can through certain pieces of gear that you wouldn't otherwise normally get. It still wasn't very good, I don't think, and it also kind of has me worried for the new whatever fire gem that they're putting into the game for bows. Once again, don't remember what it's called, combustion arrow or some shit, because that has similar numbers to this one, and I don't think it is going to be very good either. So it has okay DPS, but it definitely has a ceiling, and it takes a certain amount of work to get to that ceiling. And then it's also pretty jank with how it actually works because the circle just lands differently and weirdly and has bad collision issues. So the actual, mechanic of this gem was pretty awful. I think maybe it got fixed up a bit better later on through the league, but still the end result wouldn't be much better. And I couldn't really recommend trying this gem for too many people, just because it'd be somewhat unpleasant to actually interact with. And then, yeah, I think it takes a lot to get it to a decent playable damage range. So this was a Scion, and it was a bit of a hipster setup for it, but you can see here the DPS, I think, was something like maybe 5 million dot DPS. It's still consistent, it's reliable, so it's got that going for it, but it just, yeah, feels like it should be doing more for the amount of work you put into it, and you can easily have a more enjoyable and successful build just picking some other skill. So Blast Ram Trarthus, I think, was a bit of a fail, but don't let that stop you if you like it, because some people did actually still really like it and still enjoyed playing it for whatever reason. So for me, the effectiveness on that one, maybe a 5, because it still cleared okay. You know, it still did maps to a decent, respectable clear speed and level, but sometimes it just felt kind of bad. The enjoyment of it, yeah, that's got to be a bit lower. So maybe a 5. Still enjoyed putting it together, still enjoyed being kind of a bow build and doing some fire damage over time, which is somewhat satisfying because it's reliable, and seeing health bars move in a certain consistent way like that, it's not too bad. But you know, unless I absolutely hate playing a build, it's not going to get lower than something like a 5. And then realistic gear, not really. So this one may actually set a new record for some of the worst scores ever. We've got to call that maybe a 3. Like a Widow Hail's not hard to get, and certain, you know, pieces for the character, not too hard to get. But then I did craft some pretty high-end gear and use some pretty good corrupted gear as well that you're probably not replicating, maybe even ever. God knows. So have a 13, you dumpster of a skill. The next build I think was actually a pretty cool one in the end, and largely because this is one of the skills that was memed, clowned upon when it was first shown off, and it ended up being really quite solid. A big surprise package for the Trarthus gem setup, and that is the Heavy Strike of Trarthus. Now, it was kind of clowned upon because Heavy Strike, you know, what else can you do? And basically, what it was a skill that forced the use of staves, so you had to use a staff with it, and then it was going to give you extra double damage chance for int int. So it kind of forced at least a little bit of an int stack to begin with, and the way I wanted to approach it was a double stack of both int and strength, and a real different approach by combining those two on a staff with an Awakener Orb, and then stacking both at the same time. So int stack's pretty damn good, strength stack can be pretty damn good, both at the same time, and from a staff melee perspective, pretty sure that's never been done before. And the end result was a really big damaging build that could also have quite a lot of thickness. We could take some good hits, we had some good you know, damage reduction and whatnot. And the damage was a lot better than I ever would have thought it could pull out, because it had something like 50 million DPS and the capability of like 1 or 2 shotting most of these basic end game bosses. So it was a huge novelty to go in there and just hit them with some bonks and watch life bars get deleted. So yeah, I could kind of recommend that for a strike skill. If you're looking for something heavy hitting, it's going to be a bit hard to put together because it's certainly more of an kind of end game setup where you're getting lots of strength, lots of int, and a certain few good uniques, and doing a good bit of crafting and stuff. It was a cool build, and I did love just discovering something that I thought was going to be shit turn out to be quite good. The problem is, it's just kind of a basic strike skill feeling, so even though it was really, you know, good at the end of the day, I didn't love playing it because I've played enough strike skills and enough just like default attack looking strike skills that it all kind of feels the same, even if it's like a lot better. All I'm doing is bouncing around with Leap Slam and then just like slapping mobs and watching them kind of explode. So the effectiveness, the clear wasn't the best, but overall it was a pretty damn strong build, and had lots of, you know, end game potential and deleted lots of end game bosses. So something like a 9, have to take a point away for its clear. The enjoyment, putting it together, seeing it come together, and just seeing it blast all of the ass was a lot of fun. Playing it itself, for me, not my favorite because played enough strike stuff. And then realistic, yeah, I wouldn't say it's particularly realistic because it is some high-end stuff, but once you've got enough capital and you know what you're doing, it can be put together pretty comfortably. You're probably just going to need something like 50 divines for this type of a build because you have to craft a few 12 passive clusters. You need, you know, a weapon that's pretty damn good, and strength int gear, which usually is somewhat expensive because of the energy blade guys out there. So I have to give it something like a 6. It's fully doable, but not going to be doable until you've established enough capital. And with that, we have a total of, I think, 23. The next build we have is one that I went pretty far into the hipster side of things to really try and reinvent the way I had ever done a Winter Orb or kind of built a cold-based character in entirety by doing cold to fire as a chieftain. And I tried to use the new wand, I think Mythic Refractor, that gave additional projectiles if it didn't collide anymore. So it made me think Winter Orb, wanted to use this new wand, and then also wanted to use the new ring that gave you fire penetration, I think it is, for having additional fire res. But then it cuts a lot of your extra fire res, so to get a good amount of fire pen, this build needed to have 700 fire res in the end, and it was difficult to get that ring working and worthwhile. So it was a tough build to put together, and basically the conclusion was you'd be doing yourself a much better Winter Orb build just by building it much more normally instead of this hipster cold to fire thing. Just built the usual Winter Orb with Relic Ash and charge stacking and void batteries. You'd have something like 5 times more damage. The good thing about this build was, though, that it was a chieftain, used Cloak of Flame, and ended up being a pretty damn thick build. So it could take a lot of hits, it could run tier 17s very reliably, it could do juiced up maps with lots of extra Ellie dams since we had 90 to all fire, 90 to all Ellie res, I believe. Good recovery and stuff like that. So it was a good standstill kind of thick build, but it just felt a bit lackluster for a Winter Orb attempt compared to what I think past Winter Orbs have done for me and what other Winter Orbs on the market were doing. So if you scroll through and find stuff on the video, you can see me doing some pretty disgusting tier 17s, and it just didn't have crazy DPS. So it was a lot of face tanking. It was a lot of burning through life bars, but it worked. It worked pretty damn well for all of that. Just a bit weird. I think a bit too weird. So the effectiveness of it, it's hard to rate because it wasn't the best build for like these endgame bosses power rate wise, but it did them well and it did mapping really well. So I still think it has to have something like an 8. The enjoyment of it is probably where it falls off because I knew that it was not the best attempt at a Winter Orb, and putting together all that fire res was honestly a pain in the dick because every single time I think I had enough fire res and I'd get to another threshold, I'd keep just not having enough because the amount that it cuts from that ring is pretty damn annoying. So I think that one has to be something like a 5. And the realistic gear, it wasn't terrible to gear, just some really weird fire res stuff. The wand itself is basically free, it's cheap, and the chest is not very expensive. So it's somewhat realistic, I think. It's just not super worth trying to copy, I don't think. And that fire res ring has better applications, probably more like attack-based builds than something like a Winter Orb Chieftain, which starts off on the wrong part of the passive tree and then wastes a lot of your tree trying to branch away from that. So what we got in the end is a 20 out of 30. The next build was actually kind of a surprising one in that I think I ended up making from memory my best ever Wander. Now, with this build, it was the Whispers of Infinity Amulet, which was a pretty well-established amulet that's good for certain types of builds, and I wanted to kind of tackle it with a slightly different approach. What it is it gives you a bunch of extra flat added chaos damage for stacking mana. So it was the first time I ever stacked mana on a build, I think, like really truly stacked it, and I was trying to use all that added chaos to turn it into a Wander as a kind of int CI base occultist, and I was trying one of the new wanding skills that gave extra damage based off of mana. In the end, I think I ended up swapping to just Power Siphon, but as you can see, I was using Kinetic Blast of Clustering, I think, here for a good portion of the build, and then I tried Power Siphon as well. But basically, it gives you a lot of extra chaos damage. We're talking like pretty dirty amounts of chaos damage, similar to Replica Alberons, and then on top of that, you can use all that extra mana to have some good extra energy shield as well. So the character ended up being super thick, have good DPS, something like 20 million DPS, which is pretty damn good single target for a Wander that's not doing any, super illegal stuff. And just a character I played for quite a while. I think hit level like 95, did a lot of end game mapping on. Could, face roll a lot of these maps without too much effort. And even did some really thick tier 17 content as well because, yeah, it could just handle anything that was thrown at it. For Ubers and stuff, it didn't have the biggest DPS, so it wasn't the best choice for, just going in and blasting Ubers, but it was a very reliable farmer, very reliable end game content build. And yeah, at the end of the day, for a Wander, that's pretty damn cool. So the amulet did get a slight nerf this coming league, but not anywhere near enough to actually make an impact to the amulet. It's just going to lose some energy shield, basically. And then who knows, maybe some of these new wanding skills are going to be really good with this kind of a setup. You can see the graphics on the screen turn to absolute shit when you have your sniper's mark going off and just doing crazy damage. But then when you have power siphon going off, let's say over here, it's pretty clean and not too much is going on. But tier 17 modifiers can still be pretty crazy and shit up the screen. Overall, yeah, I think this Whispers of Infinity Amulet will probably be something I play around with again in another attack-based build. Once again, a little bit more hipster of a setup, not just, the usual thing that everyone was doing with it. And I'm looking forward to seeing what those new wanding skills can bring to the table as well. So pick Power Siphon, pick Kinetic Blast, maybe even some of the new skills should have some good results. Though it won't be a character you'll be putting together anytime soon because it needs good CI gear. So it's not unreasonable stuff to put together, but it can be somewhat expensive and somewhat endgame, talking like 50 to 60 divines worth of stuff. But it is realistic if you know what you're doing and have the established capital. The effectiveness for this one, pretty much a 10, mapped like a beast. Could AFK, like pack some mobs like a beast, and then also do decent end game DPS. The enjoyment of it, pretty much all the way there. Maybe a 9, because I don't know. Some builds are cooler, but it's almost a 10, let's just say. So pretty damn fun and strong. And then realistic gear, it's not too hard to do. It's a little bit expensive, but we'll have to give it something like a 7. So let's give it an end result of 26. Next build was yet another The Boys flail style build. So what we mean when we say the boys is calling in the boys of Vaal Double Strike. You build up a few Vaal charges, press that button, get a few clones of yourself, and then all go ham on a certain enemy. This time around, I tried to go, once again, somewhat different and hipster, and also kind of an obvious play of trying to put Celestial Brace onto a champion. Unfortunately, that glove is very rare at this point and very expensive, so I waited until much later into the league when they were a good bit more affordable and then put them onto a champion. The idea there is stacking a lot of Fortify gives you a lot more attack speed, and then using a champion and stacking armor and evasion with a Perseverance, we could have a lot of extra damage scaling, and then all that Fortify, all that armor evasion, made us pretty fucking thick. Even though we've only got 3k life, certain viewers have already pointed out that's not a lot. They're kind of fucking stupid because life is no longer the be-all end-all. It's more about your actual damage reduction. And in this case, we're a pretty thick build. So we also went with Rakiatas on this build, which is a big two-handed sword that has inversion of enemy res, and then you use a certain rune that inverts, like lets your auras apply to enemy mobs, stacking their res, and then inverting those res for some sneaky tech to have lots of extra damage against anything around you. That's still perfectly viable and perfectly doable in the new league and all that. And it's a pretty cool way of building a character. A lot of people did do their own versions of Rakiatas, typically with Smite, because with a Rakiatas you need some sort of sources of extra damage to actually, have a lot of damage on the weapon. I think I used, in this case, no, it wasn't actually a Mercenary for that, but yeah, stack a few auras or stack, some damage from somewhere, Smite in particular, and you can get some pretty big damage happening from Rakiatas with the inversion action. I tried to go with Double Strike and Vaal Double Strike. It's not the strongest thing out there, but it is quite a lot of fun to call in the boys. And then, of course, the Celestial Brace itself, pretty hard to get at the moment, and I don't think there even was one on the market for like the first week of the league, which is how rare it is. But it is a pretty good item, pretty cool item as well. So, as you can see, extra attack speed per fortify, and then the new champion node could give you a lot more attack speed for all your fortifies, and we just got a lot of attack speed from that. So it was kind of a cool build, not particularly worth doing, and I think I built it a few different ways while I was going, so it could have been better. But yeah, not too bad at the end of the day. The effectiveness of it, something like an 8. The clear's pretty mid. It's just jumping around doing some double strike without any real explosions. But the bossing and stuff was pretty decent, and we could definitely take a hit on it. The enjoyment on that one felt a bit basic. It wasn't anything too special for double strike this time around. Like, probably need some kind of explosions or some satisfying addition to the build if it's going to be another double strike at this point. And the realistic gear, not at all, because Celestial Brace, I'm not sure when you'll be able to get that in the new league, so who knows. And otherwise, it's still some pretty well-rounded gear aside from that, so you can stack a lot of armor and evasion. So with that one, maybe something like a 3, just because of the Celestial Brace mostly. So with that, we get a total of 18 for what was actually a pretty good build. Next build we had was, I suppose, another hipster build because it was using Stormcall of Trarthus, and that thing kind of fucking sucks. I was committed to trying to make it work anyway, and to do that, I wanted to incorporate it into a full Phys dot sort of setup with spell slingers. So pretty much none of the Phys dots by themselves seem to be enough. So you're trying to combine them, and in this case we had Reap, Exsanguinate, and then Stormcall of Trarthus. And unfortunately, I think Stormcall of Trarthus was like doing the least of the work of those 3, even though I think I gave it the most links for a Spellslinger setup. But I tried to make it do as much as humanly possible by doing, I think it was a Berserker setup with the Rage Hat that gave you more spell damage, and then all of those Phys dots together. Scaling Pride so the enemy takes more physical damage. And in the end, it was just an okay build. Like, put it all together, and the dot damage was respectable, maybe something like 5 to 10 million DPS, which for very consistent dots is pretty good. But the problem is that the Stormcall of Trarthus itself was only dealing like, I don't know, 1.5 million DPS. It was something just not very good for what I was hoping it would do. And it just does not make very much sense as a skill because its actual dot damage is kind of shitty, whereas its hit damage is kind of good. But then you wouldn't really scale its hit damage because you're better off just doing normal Stormcall. So it was kind of left in a pretty awkward place. That said, all the Phys dots got buffed for this next patch by 15%, I think. So if you tried to do a similar build to this, you'd have quite just a little bit more success. Maybe it'd be a bit harder to replace the Mercenary's damage, but I don't think it was outweighing its 50% more life against enemies anyway. So yeah, you could still do something like this, and absolutely Phys dots are something that should be looked at this coming league, because I did it prior to them being buffed, and it was still pretty decent. Problem is, Stormcall of Trarthus, maybe that one doesn't even need to be involved in all of this business. So it wasn't too easy to put together, I don't think, but it wasn't, that big of a result. I don't know if it's even on here. It's probably not. Fuck it, who cares? The effectiveness of it was something like a 7. It could do damage and map decently enough and take some hits here or there, but its single target was pretty not good. The enjoyment of it, in the end, I think it was maybe like a 5, just because it pretty much didn't do what I wanted it to, which was highlight the Stormcall of Trarthus as the main thing of the build. And then it's a bit of a clusterfuck, just, blood stuff everywhere, and the bitrate was horrible for that build too. Realistic gear, it was kind of realistic after just checking it again now, but it was fairly expensive for the end result being somewhat weak. So we're talking like, I don't know, 40 divines to have like a 5 to 10 million DPS build. Nothing too impressive. So let's call that something like a 4. Give it a pretty shitty score, but still, yeah, did something. So we'll call it a overall 16. The next build, when it got up and running, was pretty unanimously my build of the league, maybe even my build of the ever. We are talking Energy Blade Spark. Now, in this kind of a setup, you could have pretty much put any spell and just made it kind of work, but Spark was working pretty damn well for some reason. I guess maybe I had uh, good cast speed and stuff with fanaticism. I don't know. Basically, the idea was to go Energy Blade, try and play Spark, and then see where it took me, and do Energy Blade in a way that most people don't do, and that is just stacking a shitload of ES and Int, and then becoming CI, instead of the conventional ones of being like low life and using Strength Int sort of scaling. I still think I scaled a bunch of Strength Int, but instead I just went like heavy on ES gear, and then went CI, which means that we had quite a lot of thickness from, our chaos immunity, and then good recovery. And basically, I ended up having the most damage I think I've ever had from any build. And if you really went hard with this type of build and this type of a setup and put together, Mage Blood and all this other cool shit, you could crack 1,000,000,000 DPS. Now that was what was most impressive to me of the build in the end, because I put it together and I had something like 200 to 500 million, hard to tell, and I knew that there was still a higher ceiling for this type of build where if someone really tried to put it together, they'd have about 1,000,000,000 DPS. And it wasn't doing anything too crazy, like it wasn't cheesing any particularly crazy items. It was just very strong interactions. The Mercenary, unfortunately, from memory, did put a good bit of work into it. It gave us an extra couple of auras and also Perkle's Toe, which gives us a lucky lightning damage. So because of that, like, you may end up having somewhat less DPS if you put it together in current times, but the good news is we had more than enough damage to face roll pretty much the entire game. And I think it was my Simulacrum farmer of choice in the end as well. If we look at some of the DPS, Incarnation of Fear here just gets bounced around and kind of slapped up pretty quickly. And it farmed most Ubers for the end of my league. Like, I just chained a bunch of Uber Mavens, and it was a character I felt like pretty much full confidence into going into most Ubers and even some pretty disgusting tier 17s, because I knew that pretty much no matter how badly I fucked up, I could still come out with the win. The only other thing is I did use Fanaticism for like mana solve and for cast speed, and it's not super comfortable for, most people to try and fuck with this sort of thing. But once you get used to it, it's really not too bad. So with that, I think we need to give a few ratings, and I want this one to have as many build of a league things as possible. Effectiveness, it was a 10, cleared like a beast, did DPS like a beast for single targets, and probably the most DPS I've ever had. Enjoyment, pretty much a 10, loved playing it, and loved farming on it. Realistic gear, if we have a quick look at our gear, we had just a good bunch of strong energy shield stuff, which is realistic to do if you just have currency and stuff. And as I've just been pointed out, it actually had nothing to do with Doriani's Merc. So that was part of why it was such a good success of a character, because in a league where everyone was doing Doriani's Merc and cheesing lightning damage, our build did not do that. Instead, we opted to just go some nice, clean, wholesome, ethical Inquisitor action that ignored enemy res and just did some clean, normal, replicable in the future kind of damage. No Dorianis involved. And yeah, so with that one, yeah, it's not super realistic, but it is possible to put together. It's Energy Blade. You don't even have a weapon. How hard can that be? Give it a 7. So overall, build of the league, maybe one of the strongest builds I've ever done, 27. The last build that we are showcasing here was one that had to spend a good bit of money, because as you see, got a little bit lucky here or there, had a bunch of money to spend, and basically just slapped a whole bunch of items onto a build in a hipster sort of fashion by using the Omni amulet that people pretty much forgot existed because it's not very like worth scaling anymore compared to many other things, especially in a league of Doriani mercs. So I went with a Slayer that scaled Omni that did Ralakesh and Brutal charges. Wait, Ralakesh? Yeah, I think it had Ralakesh. Double check. Ralakesh. And it was Shield Crush using what was, at the time, a better drop rate of a Maven wand, but still wasn't super expensive. So not too many people were still using those. I divined it up a bunch to get a really good roll, and then used a lot of extra percent Ellie, percent Phys as Ellie from that wand into Shield Crush, and made what was actually a really surprisingly effective character. Shield Crush itself is nothing too special for like clear, but you know, if you're fast enough and zoom around, use Herald of Ash and whatnot, it does pretty well. But this character in the end, even though it only has 2.8k life, took on pretty much all content in the game, including, you know, Ubers and stuff, and was actually probably one of the thickest builds I'd ever played because it had like versatile combatant for nearly capped block, nearly capped spell block. It had like 90 Phys damage reduction. It had Fortify. It had Slayer Overleech and damage reduction from the Leech. So it was actually a really effective character for what it was. And it also had, I think, a Precursor's Ring for some damage reduction as well. Overall, it was a disgustingly thick build, but it was also a very expensive one. I think it cost me maybe like 100 plus divines to put this one together because I was trying to spend some money thanks to it being pretty much the end of the league, and then pretty much the you know, idea to put together a whole bunch of silly items. And then we made even more money randomly. So I think the build basically ended up paying for itself. So if we're looking at the character and the gear, something like a replica Furl's Foe with +2 wasn't super expensive in this league, but typically is going to be pretty hard to get. If we're looking at the shield that I made, that was pretty hard to do. It can be replaced with Emperor's Vigilance, of course. Omni, super cheap, no one's playing with it, but I think it's a little bit underrated at the moment because if you did it just the same way as always, stack a bunch of attributes, get a bunch of Omni, it's still really good. Gives you a lot of res, gives you a lot of penetration. And then, yeah, I had this precursor for +1 max frenzies with extra attack block, so it was a little bit high end because of things like that. Overall, pretty damn good build. And yeah, it needs to be for the amount we spent for it. The effectiveness gets something like a 9 because it was super tanky, super strong, not the best clear, but pretty good single target as well. The enjoyment probably needed more explosions, more AoE to be properly enjoyable. Realistic gear, no. That needs something like 2 because it was probably one of the most expensive builds I've ever made. So in the end, this one gets a nice healthy 18, and that is a little bit unfortunate. Now, I did have one other build that I played that isn't really going to get a rating, and just kind of an honorable mention at the end because I didn't even give it a video. And so that last build is Pepe Nuke Kermit Gape, the Burning Arrow or Vaal Burning Arrow build that was attempting to revolutionize the world with a Doomfletch. So with this build, we did use a Mercenary that had Rallying Cry and gave us a lot of extra Phys, and then tried to make Doomfletch a thing because of that. Without that Mercenary, Doomfletch is still going to be complete trash unless you're using Abyssal Jewels for minion stacking, which is pretty much the only way to use it. Even with that Mercenary, this Doomfletch build and this Vaal Burning Arrow was still kind of lackluster. We were then hurrying off to play something else. I can't remember what, maybe Last Epoch, something like that. So in the end, this character didn't get a video of its own, but there's nothing too really special to write home about. I think this was a more expensive and more hipster version of my previous Vaal Burning Arrow build, which was the Voltaxic one, and that was just a better Pepe Nuke. But basically the idea is big Vaal Burning Arrows like that. You just spam those on a boss and just insta-kill them. But yeah, this was kind of just a build that, you know, I put a bunch of money into once again to try and make work, especially with the Merc, and just wasn't particularly good. Like, it was okay, it still killed bosses, it still cleared, but, you know, for what you spent, I ended up basically making a worse version of the first time I played Vaal Burning Arrow. So nothing too special, and I'm not going to, you know, bother rating that or anything like that, because I never even gave it a video. With that though, I'm going to say thank you very much for watching. That was the Mercenary Build League review video. Hopefully it didn't go too long. It probably did, maybe an hour. We'll chop it up and put it up hopefully soon. We've got a whole bunch of new builds coming our way, most likely with the new league, because there's new ascendancies, there's some new gems, and I think there's going to be a lot of dangerous combos out there for us to experiment with. Once again, let me just let you know that don't always just follow the meta. Yes, there's a lot of people out there playing a certain one or two skills, and just because it's the best doesn't mean it's going to be the funnest for you. And honestly, it's kind of up to the streamers and content creators to promote a few more experiments and other builds out there so that people can latch onto them and see that there's a more diverse meta. Because currently, I've done my best to steer away from pretty much everything everyone else has done, and we keep discovering really cool, fun new skills and builds to incorporate into our lives and playstyles. With that, yeah, hope that was fun, and I'll see you guys in the new league. Thank you very much for watching. See you next time.